difficult people can really test us, our patience, our resilience, can test our practice. I found in my life that probably difficult people are probably, people that, so-called difficult people that I see as difficult, and I'll talk more about that, are probably the biggest challenge to practice with. And we all have these people in our lives. I've discovered, I've asked many people, no matter how cheery someone is, they seem to have a difficult person. So what would the Buddha say how we should relate to these difficult people that pop up in our lives? So I want to explore kind of how we can relate in different ways with these so-called difficult people, because they are actually an opportunity to transform. So I really want to hit that point home, that to look at difficult people as part of our curriculum. That they're not to be avoided. We're going to talk about how forgiveness and metta meditation can be part of practices that we can bring into working with difficult people, and then also how they can be a key part of our spiritual growth and pathway to awakening. So there's difficult people everywhere, right? It could be a family member, it could be a coworker, it could be a complete stranger that you bump into, could suddenly become what you think of as a difficult person. And I do see them as, for most people, the biggest challenges. I mean, human beings face, financial difficulties, other kinds of, physical illnesses and so on. But when it gets down to it, I think a lot of our stress and anxiety comes about in relationships, in relations with other people. Do people kind of see that? Am I a little, because that's my experience, and I've talked to a few other people in the practitioners, and they've said the same. So hopefully that's the feeling of people out there. I had to start with a little story. It's kind of made up, but it's kind of got some personal history perhaps to it too. It's called Sam's Encounter with a Parking Spot Thief. So Sam arrives at work feeling happy and eager to start his day, but his excitement's kind of short-lived, because he arrives and there's a car in his parking spot. It's got his little name on the plaque in front of the spot and everything. But there's this car there. So Sam pauses and remembered how he might have reacted to this situation in the past. When he had just started practicing the Buddha's teachings years ago, he thought that being a Buddhist meant that he should never get angry, he should never react to situations, shouldn't disagree with others. So if somebody took his parking spot, he should just pretend that it didn't bother him, and kind of go through the day trying to convince himself that everything's okay, when really he's just underneath fuming and getting angrier because he's trying to suppress it. So he used to kind of pretend, right? We've probably all been there. But he didn't find that was easy, because he'd find himself, as I said, getting annoyed more and more during the day. After 15 years of practicing, just throwing out a number, it could be any number, Sam realized that this wasn't what the Buddha was instructing, to just kind of suppress and ignore when something like this happens. He understood that denying it isn't what the teachings were asking of us. So he decided to try to live the teachings, just to kind of see what would happen. And there was somebody in his parking spot, so he thought, here's a chance to kind of, to see if I can live this. So he took a step back and he tried to, stop jumping to conclusions about why there's a person, the car in his parking spot. He kind of went into the don't know mode. He thought, well, maybe the person, there was a medical emergency and they just, went into the, because I do have like the best parking spot. So they went into the parking spot and then had, ran in and to call 911, or maybe they forgot their glasses and they couldn't see the sign, or, could be anything. In other words, he kind of went into that, don't know mode, and some compassion actually came up, because who knows what's happening in that person's life that caused them to park in the parking spot. And then he was aware of, the emotions that came up when he saw the car. So again, rather than suppressing them or denying them, he decided, I'm not going to avoid them. I'm going to just look at those emotions and really feel right into them. And of course, the body's a really good place to feel emotions. And you feel, everybody I find has a spot. As soon as I say, I'm in a meditation, and I do this often in meditations, because the invitation is to accept tension in the body. You pretty much know where you're going to go right away. Do most people find that? Like, it's not that I got to search around. Well, it's going to be in this, shoulders, forehead, wherever it might be, back. And those are common. Around the eyes. Someone's told me the tension rests around their eyes. So you tend to know where it is. But anyway, he decided he was going to go sensing into what's present in the body. He saw the tension, and he saw that there was some emotion, distress present there, and he just continued to open to it and feel into what was present in the body. And he found that he was able to, kind of just think clear about the situation and proceed. He never found out why somebody parked in his parking spot. He went out later and the car was gone, so he simply moved his car from the visitor spot back into his spot, and silently expressed gratitude for the practice that allowed him to remain balanced in this situation, which might not have happened in the past, and realized that the teachings of the Buddha helped him to shift from a kind of more reactionary mode into more of a wise and compassionate response. So I hope that story gives you a little taste for what I'm pointing to in terms of practicing with difficult people. Because when you come across a difficult person, you can do the same thing. Now, this is more of a difficult situation, I guess, but it's what came to mind. But you do the same thing with a difficult person, and you can do it in a meditation. It's not something you tend to, because a lot of people want to meditate to feel relaxed, right? And calm. I do these meditations. I've had people go, "Why? I came here to get relaxed, and you're telling me to imagine a difficult person, and then, of course I feel stress in my body, and then you want me to go look at it and be curious." But that's where the practice, where it really comes alive, is when we become real curious about the uncomfortable, the unpleasant, rather than numbing or distracting. And it's important to remember that we're not passive in the practice either, right? We don't breathe in and recognize in our body and then become doormats and let people take advantage of us. We still have to set boundaries, and we operate from a place of understanding. There's a short piece in a book by Mark West Moquette. And the book is called Zen and the Art of Dealing with Difficult People, where someone asked a Buddhist teacher, "I'm a Buddhist now, what do I do when somebody parks in front of my house?" And the Venerable Robina said, "Ask them to move." So that kind of points to the early bit of the story, right? In fact, that quote kind of got my mind rolling onto that story. When you started practicing, maybe, I shouldn't say anything. I'm a Buddhist, geez, I'm vegan now and don't drink coffee anymore, and on and on. And so I shouldn't say anything. Well, you should just ask them to move. I want to start, before I get too far into this, by saying that sometimes it is skillful to steer clear of extremely toxic people. So this doesn't mean you have to like engage with everybody by any means. In fact, I've disengaged from many people in my life over the years. In some cases, people can be so harmful that the only healthy course of action is to remove yourself from the situation and to just not engage anymore. For example, a partner that's violent, or employment situations that's so poisonous that it affects your mental health. Right? These are situations where you step back and you remove yourself from it. So in this talk, I'm not talking about those kinds of difficult people. And when you do metta meditations, loving kindness meditations, or any Tonglen or compassion meditations, forgiveness meditations, I don't suggest that you bring to mind those type of people. I just in fact, I just had a conversation last night with somebody, and they were talking about how we should relate to this person. And I said, I don't think we should relate to them at all. So I think you're the last person in our group that's relating to that person. I think we just need to withdraw for now and let them grow on their own. And it's just too toxic and hurtful to the people around. So as I said, insight meditation asks us to practice with difficult people in a variety of ways. I've mentioned a couple of them. Metta practice, right? Have you noticed in metta practice, one of those difficult people? Forgiveness practice. Jack Kornfield does a lot of work around forgiveness meditation and what that looks like. And also, it can be a real core piece of your path to awakening. Difficult people can directly contribute to your awakening in a big way, because they present an opportunity to practice. Without difficult people, what would you work on? Yeah. The Dalai Lama puts it this way. I love this quote. Our enemies provide us with precious opportunity to practice patience and love. We should have gratitude towards them. He uses the word enemies. It's a translation of a Pali word. I forget what the Pali word is, but the Buddha uses that word, and it gets it's kind of more difficult people as opposed to like arch enemy, kind of the toxic types. Our enemies provide us with a precious opportunity to practice patience and love. We should have gratitude towards them. So there's the forgiveness and compassion meditations that we can do, and daily life practices. It's a letting go. I find forgiveness practices is a letting go of resentment and anger towards someone that's wronged us. It's not a weakness, it's actually a courageous act. That it really, what it does is it frees us from the past, right? Because when you haven't forgiven someone and you're angry, you're still kind of chained to that person. But once you forgive them and let go of any resentments, you're no longer chained. You're no longer kind of dragging around the ball of anger, which of course gets us nowhere. The Buddha says, hatred never ceases by hatred, but by love is healed. One of his maybe most famous quotes. Hatred never ceases by hatred, but by love alone is healed. So it requires a deep sense of compassion and love, and it doesn't mean accepting their actions, their behavior, but rather acknowledging them and understanding that there's causes and conditions that led to this. And we've talked about that these things all happen due to causes and conditions. Yeah. There's another famous Tibetan Buddhist story. Two monks encounter each other, Tibetan monks, after years of being released from prison where they were tortured. And the first monk asks the second monk if he's forgiven his captors, to which the second replied, "I will never forgive them, never." And the first monk replied, "Well, I guess they still have you in prison, don't they?" So kind of how illustrates how not forgiving really shackles us to the past and prevents us from growing, really, and moving forward. I'm gonna move. This is the slogan. We went through the Lojong slogans, I don't know, years ago. I think some people were around. How many people were around when we did the Lojong teachings? Jason, just a few. Well, we could revisit. Those are fun. There's like 90 some odd of them, right? And there's just these slogans that you kind of you kind of look at, and then you look at, well, how do I practice with that slogan? And I love slogans. And this Lojong slogan is "Be grateful to everyone." And it's really pointing towards gratitude to people that are annoying, is how it translates. They call it annoying people. Be grateful to all the annoying people in your life. Without annoying people, we wouldn't have the chance to cultivate important qualities of patience, loving kindness, and compassion. So the slogan is really pointing to that. Difficult people help us evolve, and therefore we should be thankful to them. Have you ever tried that, being thankful to an annoying person? It really shifts it's a mind shift, because when you look at somebody that's maybe really being annoying, and you kind of go, it's just constant conditions, and who knows what they've been through today, really a sense of compassion wells up, right? They're no longer an annoying person, they're just a person that's suffering. So it's the response is more of compassion rather than, anger or frustration or whatever it might be. And difficult people are really so-called difficult. I had a quote here from Thich Nhat Hanh that was good. I just kind of skipped over it. Difficult people are. We create the difficult person, right? It's not that they may be doing something that's annoying or harmful, but most often we have this thing called defensive projection. And I don't want to get too much into psychology, but if you ever want to learn a little bit about what your egoic mind is doing, read up on projection. It's a fascinating psychological thing. Like, we're very, very good at deluding ourselves into thinking it's everybody else's problem, and a lot of it is this projection where we're unconsciously defending ourselves by projecting our negative traits onto other people. So if you find certain things in other people really annoy you, turn the mirror around, because you probably have that negative trait that you're unconsciously defending yourself against from facing. It's really, really an interesting way to look at what the egoic mind's doing. And this is all just survival protection. It's what egos do, right? The egoic mind is there to protect you and help you survive, so it's going to do these kinds of things. So it helps you, and it avoids you from taking responsibility then for personal responsibility, and it shifts the focus and blame then to another. And that's where a lot of difficult people, that's what's going on, is this defensive projection. My very first retreat in my life, I was in my 20s, was a non-silent Christian meditation retreat. I think it was 20 2 years old. And it was a week-long, meditation north of Toronto. And there was a person on the retreat that everybody found annoying, irritating. Of course, it wasn't silent, so we could talk about this person, right? And but like the rest of the group, I was trying to be a good Christian and not be annoyed. It's just like the good Buddhist who wasn't being annoyed. But she's constantly irritating me. And eventually, we all kind of talked, and we sat down as a group and tried to understand what was bothering us about this person. And after 4 days, we thought, okay, let's write down our thoughts on paper and actually sort of get out what's going on. So we each wrote down what was bothering us about Linda. I'm just using a made-up name. And when we compared our notes, we were shocked. The woman who was struggling with throwing things away wrote that Linda is a pack rat who just can't let things go. Another person who's worried about getting old said Linda's so old she doesn't catch on very fast. Another person who had a hard time learning said she's just not very swift. It's so frustrating to watch it. And I wrote that she's just so irritable, and anger always flares up. So we quickly realized that it wasn't Linda at all, but we were all doing a defensive projection, right? I was working on, anger. So I saw anger in other people, and that's what annoyed me in other people. Oh, it's an angry person. They get irritated so quickly. Why don't they do something about that? That was my projection. So just be aware of that when you're looking at difficult people. Not all the time is it them being difficult. Sometimes they just are difficult, annoying people, right? But oftentimes you'd be surprised how much of it is the egoic mind doing this defensive projection thing. Well, this is really 3 talks. I'm going to run out of time. So I'm not going to say much about Metta, but maybe I'll do a whole talk on how important Metta practice is. I did Metta practice for probably 10 years straight because, of course, anger, the antidote is Metta, right? And it's a really good practice for people that are working with anger. But when you do Metta, for those that aren't familiar with it, you bring loving kindness usually to a person that you can easily feel loving kindness feelings towards. So it's somebody that's close to you. Then you might go to yourself, a benefactor, somebody that's helped you in your life, and then eventually get to a difficult person. In fact, some of the loving kindness retreats, they don't even do the difficult person part, and I kind of think it's kind of strange because it's a core part of the. Have you ever been to a loving kindness meditation where they skip over the difficult person? I have, and it's kind of to me that's kind of the core of the practice. I guess there would be situations where it's appropriate. So you eventually come to this difficult person and send metta, send loving kindness to a difficult person. So that's another way that we can practice with a difficult, so-called difficult person. But I want to talk about difficult people as being a core component of spiritual growth. Because this is, I think, really where the opportunity lies. It's they challenge us, right? These kind of relations, they challenge us. And when we challenge ourselves, we grow. That's just what you do. Like if you want to get physically strong, what do? You challenge your body. In fact, you might lift weights, and it actually produces little micro tears in your body. You push your body to the point where you produce micro tears, and then the body heals itself and grows stronger as it repairs and heals itself. So it's kind of the same. It's similar. It's difficult people challenge us and cause us to grow spiritually. So if you can kind of look at it that as your workout for the day or whatever, this is, and just kind of look at it as an opportunity and see it as a core part of your practice. See them as blessings. See them as a Dharma teacher. Vida and I, my wife Vida and I, we sometimes say, when something happens like that and we're dealing with kind of one of us will inevitably say, well, there's a really good Dharma teacher, and it's just kind of like really acknowledging that was really difficult, challenging situation. And, by staying with it and looking and being curious and opening to it, there was growth that could occur. So it's recognizing that, first of all, they couldn't be any other way. Causes and conditions came together such that they're this way. Right? We were all annoying people in our lives. Maybe we still are. At times, we all are. Right? The egoic mind just produces these kinds of interactions where we can be difficult. But so there's cause and conditions. It's not their fault. That's a tricky thing to say because that could get into a whole other talk. But we're not resisting anything that's arising. So just like somebody in the group talked about a leaf blower on their meditation. Mike, I think, about the leaf blower. That's your meditation. So just the same way that we can accept a leaf blower into our meditation, can we accept a difficult person into our practice, to incorporate them into our daily practice. Just observing, opening, feeling what it feels like in the body during the interaction. Because if we react to the person, we just become part of the toxicity that's there, the toxic energy. And while we're doing it, a key part of this kind of practice is just to be really aware that you're not being drawn into unconsciousness. Because the ego is going to want to react. The egoic mind is going to go into defense mode. It's going to want to react. So you just have to kind of see that. The little rascal wants to react. So I'm giving and treating it like it's an entity, but it's really just processes. The egoic mind's reacting. That's what egoic minds do. I can step back from that. So just being aware when you're being drawn into a state of unconsciousness, when that sense of reactivity is starting to surface, the egoic mind will want to take over. So you just have to be very, very conscious of that. And you can even watch the egoic mind trying to take over, leading us to react rather than to be curious and then respond. But you can just watch that, right? You can go into witness mode. If you find yourself in any situation where you say, "Oh wow, I'm really feeling like just go into witness mode. Look, I can watch the ego do its thing from an observer standpoint." As soon as you do that, you're no longer identified with the ego, you're identified with the witness. It's not an egoic self, it's a witnessing self. So step back and go into the witnessing mode. And instead you can then respond in a conscious and compassionate way. And just remember what I said at the beginning. You don't have to open in this way to violent and poison, toxic, very, very toxic people, right? You can always step back from them. So as we do this more and more and more, like it's a practice, it's a repetitive thing. You begin again, you experiment with it, see what happens. Maybe the first few times you're just going to get drawn right in and you're going to react. That's fine. You step back and you go, okay, well, the ego really, was strong. in this instance, and I got drawn in, and how do I feel? Oh, I feel all tight, and I'm pounding head, and you know all the things that are that snowball when the ego does its thing. So difficult people are opportunities to surrender and opportunities for spiritual growth. There are spiritual spiritual curriculum. So I'll end it there and some time for some questions. Yeah, so I'll open it up. I said lots there. I covered quite a bit, but hopefully the main theme is looking at so-called difficult people as opportunities to practice as part of your core part of your spiritual curriculum, rather than jumping to blame or reaction. So everybody's buying the difficult people are your Dharma teacher's story. Who?
It was I.
Oh, it's right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty good narrative. That there's very few difficult people in the world. There's really a whole lot of our attachment to wanting people to be different than how they are. So that plays into how it's a teacher, because I mean, you could see like the grossly difficult people, and that's there. It becomes way more challenging with those that are falling into that subtly difficult sort of realm, and that's where we can really pick up on our attachment to how we want them to be, and then that teaches us that, like, oh yeah, there is more that I need to let go of to really, be totally okay with whatever being themselves. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, that actually plays right into the Thich Nhat Hanh quote that I was looking for, on the notion of loving our enemies. And when he said, to love your enemy is impossible. Get your attention there. The moment we understand our enemy, we feel compassion towards them, and they are no longer our enemy. So when we really understand our attachment, we understand them, then they're no longer an enemy. That's why I use the word kind of so-called when I'm speaking about enemies.
Just maybe say it again.
Yeah. Sure. Request to see it again. So that's Thich Nhat Hanh. Whoops. I'll have to make up the middle part because there's a thing going on my iPad. Here it is. To love our enemy is impossible. The moment we understand our enemy, we feel compassion towards them, and they're no longer our enemy. The moment we understand, it's not just understanding the difficult person, it can be understanding our attachments, our defensive projections, our identifications, and so on as well.
The most powerful part of my spiritual practice is working with difficult people. I love working with them. I advise never telling someone that they're your Dharma teacher.
Oh, yeah, no.
Good passive aggressive.
Yeah, no.
I think I'm in like the baby stages where I focus most on the projection part. So when I work with, what is arising within me and kind of neutralizing, or just, by definition of becoming aware, it often neutralize a little bit. And every once in a while, that can lead to the clearing of the fields. And then I can sense the truth of the moment broader than my own perspective. Like I'm one person in a room of others. And this difficult person is one, and etc. And then broadening to the compassion piece. Maybe I'll just say that the analogy of the gym is great because you don't go to the gym and try to make macro tears. You go and you try to make micro tears. So, we don't go and try to make the most irritable person in our lives like our friend. We try in little ways. Yeah, thank you for your talk. I just thought I'd share.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the point of, I guess you could choose which people you want to see as opportunities to practice and not choose probably the most difficult people to start off. And start, as you said, internally, like really looking at what's going on in the body as you're engaging with that difficult person. So you're really sensing into the emotions that are arising in you. Because that's the first thing we do is try to reject that, right? So it's a stepwise is kind of what you're pointing out. Before you get to compassion and loving kindness towards them, first you have to kind of accept what's going on in terms of your emotional state, mental state and emotional state when you engage with that person. And from there can arise the compassion and loving kindness piece. Yeah, and don't call people to their face, Dharma teacher. You're my Dharma teacher because you're really annoying. I don't know. Yeah. So start with yourself. And, the story the person started with also going into don't know mode, because instead of going into blame mode and fault-finding mode or fix-it mode, I mean, we have all these different modes, right? You can go into just don't know mode. I don't know why this person is doing this. You don't know the causes and conditions. You don't even know why you do things. How are you going to know why another person does things? You can't even know what your thoughts are going to, you can't control your thoughts. You're not going to control another person. So it's not about trying to control people. It's just about really letting go of any sense of why they're, like I don't really need to know why anybody's doing it. It's just causes and conditions. They just span out so far. So it's starting from that place and then seeing, okay, I don't know why they're doing it. But it's this mental and emotional state is what's arising in me from coming into contact with it. Kind of keeping it that simple to start. And then, of course, a lot of times, like it's a family member or work situation, you have to do something, right? So you can't just sit there and I feel tingling in my forehead. I feel, and it's got to. At some point, it goes to action yourself, but you're proceeding from a point of balance and clarity. So it's the old respond versus react, right? Rather than egoic reaction, it's a mindful response, to use some of the common phrases out there. But it's really true. You're coming from a place that's clear and balanced when you engage first with the don't know mind and the looking at your emotional and mental state. Anybody have any difficult people stories they want to share? Those are always and how they engaged with the because we can learn a lot actually by sharing with each other what we do in these, and they don't all have to be like, they're not all success stories. they're not all. We can actually grow a lot by seeing how we, in cases where we were reactive, because I mean the Buddhist teachings are, this is how we cause suffering, right? And then this is the path to the cessation of suffering. So we learn by seeing how we cause suffering for ourselves as well when we are reactive, just as much as we see how there's a cessation of suffering by practicing in this way. So both types of stories are important teachings. And they're important to share with your spiritual friends, or if you have family members or friends or that are engaged in the practice, to really share. Oh, this happened. I was confronted with this situation, and then this happened, and when I blew up, and I felt, So really having somebody and being open about those kinds of things can be very helpful in our spiritual growth.
I can share a personal experience. I've had somebody in most of my life who was extremely difficult, cold, not empathetic, not reciprocal in, sharing her life or home, but somebody I couldn't just remove from my life. And over the past 15 years or so, now that I understand a little bit more about the spectrum, I gradually began to believe that she is on the autism spectrum somewhere, which explains a lot of the behaviors. And just having that understanding that she is the result of causes and conditions that brought her to this particular type of behavior has really helped me a lot. I can be kinder and not look for anything back. And I can,
I think Maureen froze there.
Freezing rain and freezing zoom.
Freezing zoom and freezing rain. Yeah. Yeah, that's that's too bad we lost her there. That really brings home the point of not, of letting go of blame, finding. And it could be through, some knowledge of a primary cause, like a mental illness or autism or whatever, or you could just start with don't know mind. I mean, knowing something about a primary cause like that can be helpful, because the behavior can then, how to respond skillfully when you have that kind of a diagnosis. We can, even when we don't know, when there isn't that kind of a situation, we can start with the beginner's mind or don't know mind, where we just don't know why that behavior is occurring. Because most times we don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting that when Maureen was telling her story, I thought in the end, the other person didn't change, but Maureen just told herself a narrative that helped her accept the other person as she was. Mm-hmm. Just by putting a label on the other person, autistic, just solved Maureen's problem. I mean, I've been having my own problems here with 3 Ukrainians that I have in the house. And of course, because I expect them to behave the way I want them to behave, and they don't. So it's been kind of irritating when, and it's been difficult for me to accept that they have their own motivations and they're not going to act the way I want them to. And I've been making an effort to accept, well, they are the way they are, and if I want to pitch in and help with the situation in Ukraine, this is something that I can do here, that I want to do. And I've been playing this game and observing my mind that in the end, I have to realize that the irritations that really drive me nuts, sometimes they're just very small things. But I tend to focus on those little things instead of focusing on the 80% that goes well. My mind focuses on those 20 little irritants that drive me nuts, and I've been trying to. My exercise is say, well, why do I focus on the negative things, and why don't I focus on the positive? I mean, they cook, my meals are getting a lot better, my house gets cleaned. I mean, so there's lots of positives in this thing. But somehow it's the negatives that drive me nuts. So it's been a struggle for the past 2 or 3 months here when I trying to look at the same thing but with different eyes. And in the end, it's kind of working. I mean, it's been difficult to sort of work for me, but it's kind of working. And but it's all the way I look at this thing. So it's on me. It's not on them.
Yeah. Yeah, you've really summed it up there. It is on us. It's not on. That's why I use the word so-called difficult person, because it's really on us. And you pointed to the negativity bias that we all have, right? The egoic mind has, because it's protection and survival, it focuses on the negative, right? Threats.
Yeah.
Positive, I just ignore all that. And of course, then that can make for seeing people as being annoying, because you only see the annoying things that they do. You don't see all the joyful and pleasant and things that they do. So that is the practice in action right there. The fact that you saw all that is the practice in action, and you have 3 opportunities to practice. So the blessing part comes into play, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and often it's the things that irritate you, they are your teachers. You say, why am I getting irritated with this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Stephen,
Yeah.
thank you for your talk. I just had a couple of things. One was first, I'm glad you brought up forgiveness, because, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've come to understand forgiveness is more being about the person doing the forgiving than actually the person being forgiven.
Okay.
It really has nothing to do with the other person. It's all about freeing yourself up to kind of let go of all of the things that the attachments that you're harboring around this other person. And the other thing I wanted to bring up is my own experience with difficult people is, back maybe like in my previous life, I think I had a very rigid idea of the way people should be, and I think that so I encountered probably my fair share of difficult people in my life, but then I've come to slowly realize that every time I've met all of those difficult people, they were viewing me as being a difficult person as well. And it's really it had nothing to do so much with the other persons. the way they were being. It was completely to do with me, and I mean, there's causes and conditions for me being kind of rigid like that, but to getting to the point, and realizing that, yeah, I have these, that, wow, I'm just projecting these things on other people, seeing these things that I haven't dealt with in myself. So it's, I wake every morning when I wake up and go into the world, as I'm walking in the door, I immediately say, I don't know mine, and I'll just keep on repeating that to myself during the day, especially if I know that I'm going to be going where people are, because I found it's just so liberating to just see, like, I really have that person's said something, or did something that kind of seems a bit off. I don't know. I don't know why they're doing it, and I'm never gonna know why. So I can just kind of let it go and just kind of be with the kind of unfolding of that, the kind of that kind of non-verbal kind of felt sense of living in the world, as opposed to getting caught up in that egoic mind. So yeah.
Yeah, the notion of we're also difficult people to other people. I think conflict, human conflict in human interactions is mostly two illusory, egoic minds projecting onto each other. and conflict arises. Just my image of you and your image of me, our images of ourselves are colliding in some way. And that's really what it kind of boils down to. And if you can really see that at that level, you can witness, again, stepping and witnessing it and saying, okay, that's just what's occurring. That's it. And then now you're not identified with that ego that's in conflict with that other ego. You're simply watching the show and going, wow, that's... And at that point, you're no longer identified with the ego. It's very freeing. So I invite you to, another part of the practice is to step into the witness mode. So being the witness isn't, being the witness can feel like freedom. It's so liberating. So it rather than, and no, that's the practice when we say, watch this and watch your thoughts, watch the teacher is inviting you to go into witness mode and to disidentify with the ego. So it's a stepping out of the egoic mode. And anytime you can do that, you can really see from a different perspective that it's just things unfolding based on cause and conditions that are outside your control. It can actually feel like enlightenment. A lot of people, when they start identifying with the witness, actually feel like they're that this is it. They're there, like this, because it's so freeing to disidentify with the ego, that it feels like liberation. Of course, you're still identified with the witness, right? So there's still, but it's a higher level identification, right? It's still a duality. It's not non-dual awakening, but I mean, if that can be such a level of freedom to live at that level where when there's human conflict, is just to step back into the witness. Go, oh, well, there's two egos here that are illusionary egos projecting both on each other, and there's conflict, and this is what's happening. And you can see how that can be so freeing. So then again, another practice that you can try in terms of going into that witnessing or observing mode or perspective.
Stephen, I really identify with what you're saying. The one thing I've found helpful when I'm with difficult people is if I find myself like kind of maybe starting to get into that illusory mode, is to just, I notice it, and then I say to myself, what does this person really need from me? And it's like, it just, at that moment, I'm just falling to this kind of, loving awareness. Because that's really anyone that's like really triggered in that kind of survival mode. That's really, I feel like, all they really need. Like they don't have anything to attack anymore. It's like, just like, it's like when you were talking about your colleague, when you went in and just said to them, like, tell me more about that. It's like, I can't attack you anymore. It's like,
Yeah.
it's just because you're there just to hold space.
Yeah. Yeah. So just in conclusion, just say that the practice begins when we open to our moment-to-moment experience just as it is. And opening to tension in the body can be a really core practice. And it can get very subtle too. It's not something that you just do when you start this practice. It's something that you can do after years and years of practice. And it's a good way to really start the day. A nice body practice is a really good way to start the day. That's why we do yoga in the morning, right? We get in tune with our body, because then you're more likely to be embodied during the day rather than just wrapped up in the egoic mind. So just kind of start there, and then when you see when the difficult person flag goes up, you can go, come to the body, I'll start there. And then if it gets, then I can, if I see reaction, myself reacting, I can kind of step back from that into the witness. Just kind of keep it that simple, and and practice that way for the week, and then see if it resonates with you. And, it's a practice you do your whole life, really. Because the ego never goes away. Right? You need the ego. I say this all the time. I know some teachers will say, "Oh no, the ego completely dies, and then you're just in eternal bliss." Well, then you're just going to walk out in front of a car, right? Or you just go live in a cave, I guess, and somebody feeds you. But I think in our lives as lay practitioners, the ego is going to stick around, but you don't have to be controlled by it, and you don't have to be controlled by it. It can just be something that keeps you alive, and depending on your age, reproducing. Right? That's what we're wired for: survival and reproduction, and that's what the ego is good at. So I'll end on that note. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Yeah. Namaste.
Thank you, Stephen.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Have a great week.
Yeah, you too.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.